Hi, everyone. We'll just go ahead and start. I have such the pleasure of having the triple threat up on stage as the very first panel. I'd like to welcome Aun, Aryan, and Ahmed to the Growth Summit, first of all. And I have the privilege of asking them questions about things that they are sort of, paving the way for their own organizations around the 360-degree view of the customer. We have Aun representing Landmark's journey, we've got Aryan representing Asta Healthcare's journey, and we've got Ahmed looking after Al Ghanim, all the way from Kuwait. So thank you for being here with us. So I'll break into a couple of questions that I think we reviewed, but I've tweaked just to keep it fresh among all of us. The first question I want to ask you is, why are we talking about the 360-degree view of the customer? Why is it so important? And what benefits do you think it drives? So we'll start with Aun.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tota. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you, everyone who's listening. 360 single customer view. I think it's the topic of most of the organizations which have multiple brands under their wing. Today, it's mostly what you need to learn about the customer. Just to drill it down, it's the focus of that customer and what he does and when he does it and where he does transact with your brand. I think we need to learn that. It's been our marketeers' dream to learn more and more about the patterns about customers. When a customer is transacting between different average order values, different times, different sort of journeys with your brand, you need to attack him at the right time, basically. I think that's the main goal, and you need to be well versed with that information about the customer so that you can relate through personalization, through different models that brands are running. So I think main goal is, as always, increase conversion rates. So yeah, I think that's mainly where we are, and I think the focus needs to be that the customer is first. Yeah. The customer is centric. The organization needs to be basically dwelt up towards that objective.
Yeah. What about from your point of view, Aryan?
Sure. Thank you, Shweta, first of all, for having me here. Good afternoon, everybody. So I wouldn't want to answer this question directly. In fact, I have a question in mind. Why 360-degree view, you ask me? I ask you, can you think of driving a car with one eye closed? Unless you want to follow the law and return back home alive, right? So it's the same thing, right? Until and unless you are putting a blind eye to what your customers or your users are doing, there's very little you can do to add value, right? Another perspective could be, imagine, let's take a healthcare example. If somebody is suffering from, let's say, heart condition, and you don't want to message them about a medication related to, let's say, diabetes, right? That would spoil the experience. So hence it is, I think, at most important to have a 360-degree view of the customer to realize what they want, what they're looking for, right? Imagine they are looking for a solution and you are selling them a product, right? Just to bridge that gap, I think this is very essential.
And we'd love your perspective as well, Ahmed.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. And Sweta, thank you for having us all here today. So more of the same, actually. It's we'll touch upon some of similar examples. Yeah. You can't advertise sugar-infused desserts to a person with diabetes. That's not what you essentially want to do. As marketers or marketeers, what the main goal is to serve the right product, the right service to the right customer, evidently and ultimately increasing conversion. But then again, there's a massive difference when it comes to 360 customer profiles and customer personas. It's very, very different. One of them is you're actually looking at integral data. You're making educated guesses based on data, what their next move is going to be. And we'll speak later on about what success looks like in that regard. But ultimately and foremost, what you want to do in that regard is to make sure that you have sufficient data about your customers, where they're headed, what products or services they're interested in, and that's what you want to advertise.
Aun, here's a question for you. the task of bringing together online and offline data, it's a big one, right? You've got to go through lots of people, lots of process. I wanted to ask you about, what has been your experience in doing this? Because this isn't the first time you're looking at this, this opportunity ahead of you. And, is there a framework? Are there benchmarks? Any telltale signs that people can look for? Where do you
Sure.
start, almost, right?
So, see, I mean, just for the audience, earlier I was working for EMAR, Yas Holding, Landmark now. So, been through this sort of single customer view focus for a lot of organizations with a lot of large data. I think there's basically a specific framework, very simple framework. The first and foremost is that the company needs to transform. You have top level people who are driving objectives, you have mid-tier who are trying to achieve certain goals, then you have people who are the real forefront people who are connecting with the customers. The main objective is that we need every single person on board with this objective in mind, that we need to collect as much information about the customer so that it can be repurposed.
Yeah.
I think, as you asked, and also how we had earlier, what we spoke about, I think the framework is, I think, 4 main pillars. You have company transformation, then you have to make sure all that data is properly collected, make a unique identifier so that you can always reach out to whatever segment of that data which we are working on, and make the data accessible. I think those are the main 4 pillars for any company. I mean, it doesn't matter what sort of data you have. You have to make sure that you attend to these 4 pillars, from where you can then eventually start translating them into ROIs and better customer experience and higher NPS surveys, etc. I mean, earlier on, one of my experiences with Dubai Mall was BigQuery is an understatement when you talk about just the number of data sources that are being collected. Now at Landmark, you have multiple brands, multiple territories, different organizations touching the customer at hundreds of different points. So you need to make sure that collecting the data is the easy part. Translating it into usable information is what we want to look at. And then eventually, which we'll hopefully dwell on a little bit more, is that you need to find a single source of truth which will eventually define your success metrics, which in my case has mostly been loyalty, to drive those objectives. I think, yeah, those are the main sort of framework / pillars that I work on.
Okay.
And have seen success through.
Emma, here's a question for you. From your experience, what have been the biggest challenges in working in an environment where the businesses are so diverse in terms of, different stages of digitization or a different set of mindset altogether, regardless of whether their start was digital or brick and mortar, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So data points or collection of data at various different touch points with the customer, this is massively challenging. And some of the, what we faced evidently, which was very, very difficult to entail and then come out with data-driven insights, was that the majority of the business was happening in brick and mortar stores. And what we decided to do was exactly what Shahir earlier touched upon, is you need to make contact with those customers in store to be able to unify that data segmentation. You need to be able to tell that customer A, B, and C is the same customer that browsed online and then went into store and made the transaction. So just a bit of advice in terms of our experience with Excite in Kuwait and KSA is you need to focus on multi-channel cookies. You need to focus on ensuring that you find a way to speak and to collect data from your customers, which, by the way, they realize how important it is now. So you're not going to be getting any data for free from your customers anymore. This is something of the past. Everybody's well aware of what's going on, and they'll give it to you, but they want something in return. So your communication needs to be effective. They need to find something measurable and something pleasurable about them giving their data to this company, and this data needs to be utilized properly. So yeah, in conclusion, I would say that while it's very, very difficult to infuse both the digital realm and what happens in your stores, there's always a way. Focus on multi-channel. Chances are many of the customers that are transacting online are the same customers that are going to your stores and buying your items or making use of your services. And really, the most important thing here is the accuracy of the data and to be able to portray it directly in those customer profiles.
I would request if anybody has, has a penchant for looking at, offline into online through the most non-traditional way. Do have a chat with Emma. He has a very, very amazing story about how, it's suddenly changed 180 during, the first week of lockdown during COVID.
My God, yeah.
He's regaled us with that story. It's really a really fun one, which allowed them to accelerate the bringing on of offline data online through their employees, actually. So, yeah. Aryan, do talk to us about, sort of how has Aster's journey been? Because we're looking at hospitals, we're looking at clinics, we're looking at pharmacies, we're looking at telemedicine, the whole new sort of online availability of self-serve. How does that serve what's been the journey for Aster?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is the question that we've been trying to answer within Aster for quite a while now. So, Aster, with its sheer scale and size spread across pharmacies, clinics, and hospitals, it's massive, right? And healthcare is one such niche that is most data rich when it comes to a customer profiling, right? So, in fact, for healthcare, they are not even customers, right? They are patients as such. So we need to be very, very cognizant of the fact that what data are we collecting, how we are collecting that data, and how we are using it. So for us, the journey has been, and it still is going on, to sort of capture that data across all our offline channels through various mediums, one of which being POS, which is, of course, the most relevant one when it comes to gathering offline data. Getting that into one specific source, one single source, for which is also required, as on mentioned, a common identifier. So allocating that common identifier, getting all of that data across different properties into one single format, and then making sure it comes into a single dump, right? And that dump also, like, you need to identify, where you're putting that data, because considering the criticality and the regulations around healthcare data, it becomes of utmost important, right, that the data is stored in the most secure way. So that is what we are also looking to address through in our journey that we are on currently. Now merging this with the online bit is what we are doing as a next step. So we are now working on this app called One Aster app, which is basically catering to the objective of telemedicine, teleconsultation, online pharmacy. So another set of e-commerce going there, telemedicine going in there into the mix, and then another set of data being generated. Now the task is, fine, the data is being generated, but how do you club that data? Because eventually the people are the same, right, who are consuming your services offline as well as online. So then again, it comes to the point of making sure that whoever partner we are working with to collect this this online data, right, they need to be closely synced with what frameworks and what common identifiers we've set on the offline front, right? Making sure that the common dump that we've identified to get that data in is also sort of cohesive with both the partners, and eventually, driving insights from there. So that is something that we are working on right now.
And I have a two-part question for you. One is, you brought up this, like, I'm going to use loyalty as that centerpiece of that identifier to drive so much else, right? The 360-degree view is all about data, but is all data equal? And how do you go about identifying what is and what isn't? Where do you even start?
True. Why I mentioned loyalty, I'd like to answer that part first. The learnings I've seen in the industry is that when you start up, you have technology that can drive your business to a certain level of revenue. Then you have digital marketing because you start flowing in money, building that traffic, etc. each one of these steps plateau. So technology can only take you to a certain level. Then digital marketing can only take you to a certain level. After that, the CPCs and CPOs become so high that you can't manage it anymore, or you can't go any higher. What happens after that? Then is the big talk about retention. And that's where you hit loyalty. Without loyalty, that growth sphere is unachievable. You won't be able to reduce your costs. You won't be able to reduce your, make sense out of your ROIs. So looking at that aspect, I mean, if you look at your loyal database, there's always this discussion in every single high-level meeting I've been where the 80-20 model is discussed. I think that's the discussion of the past now. It's like the 95-5 model. Most of your revenue is driven through like a 5% of the massive chunk, especially in e-commerce, that's coming to your site. Most of the people, I mean, like we're at Landmark, we're servicing multiple industries. Yeah, where you're talking about furniture, you're talking about street fashion, you're talking about hospitality, you're talking about like the fitness first, etc., groceries. So it's like a wide scope. Your average order goes from like 5 to like 11, 12,000 dirhams average, removing the outliers. So these are different type of data sets that you need to look at, but you need to make sure is that every single one of these items are already operationally available to all of us, right? You have these shops in malls, you have these shops online, you have these shops on all sorts of e-commerce platforms. We're interacting now, WhatsApp should be available, things like that. So your availability is there. How do you make sure that you translate these users from one segment to the other but make revenue for the group? I think that answer is coming from loyalty. And if you look at specific data, I mean, we're way above the industry threshold from a Shukran point of view. But still, retention of those users is, I mean, the total revenue percentage is minute. Like if you look at total number of people who are making most of the revenue, you're talking about a few percent here and there. And the whole industry is gunning for that small database or that small segment. I think to reach to them is, the answer is loyalty. And answering your second question about is all data relevant? 95% is not. You have to make sure that that 5% is already tagged in your systems, which I shouldn't take any credit about. It's all Derek and product and how they've basically built a fantastic environment at Landmark for getting that data in one place and making reasonable sense out of it. When you look at the real number of customers who are transacting across all your brands, that's your gold mine, and it's a very tiny source. So yeah, I think 95% of the data is what you need to filter through, and that's where you need tools to help you as a marketeer.
So, Ahmed, I have a question here in terms of, where do you go? To which teams do you go within the organization? We can, if you could answer that for us at the macro level at Al-Ghanim versus just even Excite in terms of I'm building the 360-degree view because I want a deeper look into who my customer is. Who do you go to for the answers? Who do you involve in that journey with you? As a marketer, as a digital marketer, as an e-commerce leader, for example, right?
Okay. First point in case is that the majority of the data that you're going to get that's going to be very hard to find, you're going to find in your transactional data. Okay, that's talking about history, and that's talking about the transactions that are going to that are happening today and will happen tomorrow. Evidently, right now, especially with e-com, customers are giving you a lot more data than you actually need to market to them efficiently. The challenge presents itself more when you speak about the omni-channel journey, because you can literally walk into a store, you can make a transaction and walk out with a complete anonymous identity. So this goes back to the first question that I answered in terms of you need to be able to speak to your customers at all touch points. And all touch points are absolutely equal. This is just a choice of customer where they want to transact. If they want to transact through WhatsApp, let them transact through WhatsApp. If they want to walk into your store, they're more than welcome to. If they want to transact online, it's completely up to the customer. We are moving into a world right now where choices are everything, and you need to be available at each and every single segment or each and every single pathway where the customer is there at the end, and they get to choose where they want to transact with you. So back to the question in terms of which teams do we involve when we ask for that data. So first and foremost, you've got the data science team, and we have a full data science team that takes care of data collection points and data analytics, not just for Excite at Al Ghanem Industries, but for the entire group. And we went ahead, and when we started this single customer view, we didn't only look at our retail businesses, we looked at automotive, we looked at our FMCG businesses, we looked at our engineering businesses, because ultimately there is one market, and all of these customers, they reside within the same market. So whether they transact with you in your retail channel, or whether they're an engineering customer, or whether they're a home furniture customer, ultimately this will give you more information to make your predictions more accurate. And ultimately that's one measure of success when you're talking about collecting the data. Another team would be the operational sales team. So you need to make sure that they continuously engage with customers and they are collecting those data points that you require to be able to market effectively. And of course, you have your core central marketing team and your digital marketing team. I think with these 3 or 4 teams, this is a recipe for success when we speak about data collection.
So, Arun, I mean, there's in any case, right? We'll boil it down to the atomic level and then bring it back up into a full living being. But is there an allowance? And I'll open that question up to all the panelists. An allowance for a center point to define their 360-degree view versus coming up to allowing just the hospitals to have their golden customer record, if you will, versus the Asta group, and what how does that play? Who's looking at what, right? Can we go into that a little bit? Because Excite may have its own, but Al Ghanem will have, maybe it's quite different, or there will be a small overlap, right? How do we bridge that? Who's looking at it? How much is too much?
Yes, no, that's a very valid question. In fact, in my previous stint at Alshaya, this was something that we were still, figuring it out, because obviously there are multiple brands, and even with Asta, each Medcare is also part of the Asta group, right? So that is also something that caters to a different set of people altogether compared to Asta clinics or pharmacies or hospitals, It is, to answer your question, it is very important to have at least a central team in place to look at all of the customers combined and then understand what are the insights that we can take out from there. It could be as simple as some demographics, it could be region specific, or it could be some patterns, that you identify of people moving first to, let's say, a clinic and then move to a pharmacy and then move to a hospital. Let's say this could be one pattern that you could identify. So in order to do that, there should be a central team of data gathering sitting and sort of who are taking into data from all of these touch points, right? And then there needs to be separate BUs, as we call it, business units team, that are also gathering their own respective data, taking insights on them, and then, taking the actions based on that. And how do you govern that, right? There needs to be a governing mechanism for that. That again, sort of, there has to be a conversation within the organization to have like a win-win situation for both the business unit as well as the central marketing team, just so that you are not spamming that user, right? They are looking for solutions. They are not looking for spamming. So that is where the governance piece lies. If I think these 3 aspects are taken into consideration together and amalgamated, then I think it will be a best user journey for any consumer walking into your store. Yeah.
Anything to add, Emma?
Yeah, ultimately, what it comes down to is business goals.
Yeah.
So you can collect how much ever data you want. Data is almost infinite, right? So what happens is that as a business lead or as a business head, you need to define the goals and improvements that you want to work on, and then you collate and you collect data to be able to tackle those points. And that's where you go from there. You build the goals, then you define the strategy to reach success, and then you define within the team or within the business what does it mean to be successful when it comes to those particular goals. And data will help you in achieving those goals and on that journey. So ultimately and effectively, what happens is that you are collecting data points to ensure that pre-identified problems or improvements or whatever it is that lays within your business, you are collecting to be able to build towards pre-identified goals. I think that's the best way that we look at it over here. And definitely in terms of teams, I agree with Aryan. There should be a central team that's a repository of all data. And then as business units, as business heads, you go ahead and tell them, all right, I want to take a look at churn rates. I want to take a look at my best customers. I want to take a look at my inactive customers. And you will be able to pull these different segments of data to turn it into something measurable and actionable.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I think just to add on, I think both Aryan and Ahmed hit the nail on the head. Just something to add on here is what I've seen is whenever you will have a talk with a territory head or any of the business heads, everyone wants to talk about revenues. Yeah, there needs to be, as I said, central teams that are holding that data in place, but that team's function or that team's DNA needs to circulate around the customer. It shouldn't be around the business. It shouldn't be around the ROIs that are being driven or the revenues that need to be generated or targets. It needs to be around the customer. Today, we're in a situation where iOS has taken back information from marketeers, and we keep coming to these things like Facebook's struggling because of these insights, etc. We came to this situation because that data was abused by marketers, right? You need to build a brand, you need to build a name that a customer wants to give information to. If you want to buy a property, you are going to place your information in that market to bid for the best villa in that community. If you want to buy a certain, if you're in a process of a child being born in the family and you want to walk with that customer, you need to respect them when they're delivering a child and when they're buying gifts for them and when they're buying essentials, etc. Building a room for that child while they're growing up. So you need to make sure that the team who hosts that data centrally has the focus of the customer in mind, not purely business and revenue. Because if that's not the case, then you start losing there. You start increasing on uninstalls, you start unsubscribes, and eventually you're back to square one where you're paying to get more people to come and subscribe and install your apps. Across the board, 7 different apps, 8 different brands. If you host, obviously they're hosting that data and they're feeding your funnel. But that funnel governance, which Aryan very clearly mentioned, should lie with somebody, again, who has a focus of the customer.
Yeah. You said, and please embellish once I've said this, but in our prep session, was very passionate about, this whole idea of keeping the customer at the center, right? I'll let him expound on this, and we'll just take a detour into why that becomes so seminal, because the next big thing that's facing all of us is, hello, cookieless. So we'll just take a little diversion before we come back to, a couple more questions here. But please, can you speak to the audience about how important it is to change the mindset about our data as opposed to let's start with the customer?
Definitely. I think most businesses, especially brick and mortar businesses, have reached a sort of a mindset of monthly growth and yearly KPIs, out of which, for some reason, if you look at the whole chart, you like from top line till the bottom, every single P&L, you're talking about revenues, you're talking about costs, overheads, etc., etc. And then there's this one small line item which says NPS. Is our businesses really focusing that much on NPS today, or is it just because you have to eventually post your financial numbers at the end of the year in a publicly listed company? I think today as marketeers, we're in that space where we need to make a decision. We need to take we have that choice, and we need to give the customer that choice. We are hosting those customers. We need to make sure that we're responsible for that journey. The customer has a journey that he walks into your store or comes to your online e-commerce platform or downloads your app. and moves in with your business. You need to hold their hands till a certain point and then let them be free. Your product needs to make sure that it brings them back. The likes of marketplaces today, the likes of Amazons and the rest of them in the world, Netflix, I don't mind giving my information to them because I want to know what they want to recommend to me. I want them to know where I live. I want them to know how much I spend on certain products, which categories I want to look at. Building that within the organization is the key part, I think. If somebody walks up to a home center cashier, does the cashier just ask them for them to sign up to Shukran or scan their code, or actually believe in letting the customer know what they're looking at and how they can drive their next purchases through this loyalty program? I think that's where we want to I want to circulate this conversation with, is the customer the center? Is the customer of your organization the center of your, like if we go back and just like look through our data, how many times are we listening to that customer and how many times are we bringing that information back to people who are making decisions for them? Because their journey is the most important part, right? Average order values have helped in the past to sort of define different customer segments, different customer approaches. But today, the data that we look at, somebody who's spending 100 dirhams with your organization can or has the capability or ability to spend 1,000 or 10,000. If you look at it from that aspect, you don't just bombard them with messages with that same category value. And the discussions we've been having with MoEngage about user identification and user targeting instead of category listings, or is there more around the lines of user listing? How do you bring that information back and then start messaging, start touching them at the right time? That's a cultural change. It needs to come to the whole organization, not as Ahmed mentioned earlier. It's not one team. It's not digital marketing. It's not product. It's not the data labs. It's the whole organization, all the way to the front end. The guy who's suggesting a product in the store, they need to believe that the customer is the center, and that cultural change then is needs to be at the front of their discussion, that I'm collecting information because we're building a 360 customer view of that person who just walked in and asked how long is the store open.
Yeah.
That's the sort of, I think once we touch that cycle from a whole company perspective is when I think we start achieving goals. And the goals need to be verified across teams.
Well, not to just build the customer into the DNA of the organization. But I'd like to open up the question around living in a cookieless world and how much that switches the importance of having a 360 around your current database. Right? We won't even just say customer. We'll say patient. We'll say prospect. What are the ramifications that we're going to feel once, of course, Apple's done away with them, Safari's done away with them. We have a big proliferation of iOS in our region in general, so goodbye to that as well. Now is Chrome's turn, right? Now it's Google's turn and they pushed back the deadline. But it's coming in 2023, right? What's going to happen? And how important does that make data collection and orderly data collection to build these kind of, on these opportunities in the future for both Asta and Alganim?
Yeah, no, definitely. We knew this was coming for quite a while, right? And I think that is the reason advertisers maybe 5 years ago started prioritizing first-party data.
Yeah.
So, and as Aun touched based on before, it is not just like they don't want to give you your data. They will give you your data provided what they are getting in return, right? And the idea of getting the data in the first place is so that you can retarget those users and also identify their actions, what they are doing internally in a platform. That I think is a two-step approach. Now, with a cookie-less world, I think we can break down this approach, right? If we are looking to retarget a certain user, it need not be based on a PII information, right, or a specific identifier. What Google is doing now going forward, they're introducing something like they are clubbing people into different targets and different topics and different segments through which you can actually target those users based on contextual targeting, right? So I think it totally makes sense, because why not? You know, if people are interested in a certain form of content, and for example, if somebody is interested in finance related content, they will see those kind of people targeting them, right? And it will not always be a mess like it is currently because of the data being abused, right? And coming to the second part of using that identifier is in tracking their activity internally, right? And for that, you don't need that kind of information, right, anymore. For that, like I think partners like MoEngage and all are already have this functionality built in, is that you would provide an identifier already to a certain user, right? And that identifier, I think, can be drilled down to understand the user of the usage of the consumer inside your platform, right? It could be merged with other aspects like time of doing something, right? And I mean, there are multiple things to go about and ingest that data in today's time, right?
Yeah.
So I think I see always the glass half full. So I think this is the perfect time for us to go cookie-less, as opposed to maybe 5 years ago, right? So I don't see it as a challenge. I see this as an opportunity for the internet to go to the next step, basically.
Got it. And what about from your point of view in terms of budgets and, attracting, because, Algorithm is, especially say for Excite, even for that one division, you've got to go out and do a little bit of acquisition proactively. And how does that get affected? What happens if you're just, without an identifier out there, you don't even know what step of who is it? Is it the same person? What step they are in their decision making? Have they already heard from us and they've already bought, and I just don't know that, right? So how does that affect the balance between known and unknown?
All right. Well, first off, I'll start by saying, had you asked me that question last year, I would have been very scared to answer.
Yeah.
Okay, but now I think that with what happened with iOS particularly, and this is an open question for everybody in the room. Take a look at the number of transactions right before the change happened, and then what happened afterwards. You would have suffered only 2 or 3 weeks because you would have reinvested your budgets elsewhere, and you would get those transactions from somewhere else, and that's exactly what's going to happen in a cookieless world. You have a set of specific budget. You have your specific channels. You look at the ROIs based on those channels, and tomorrow, as Aryan said, there's going to be so many new opportunities that we probably still don't even know about today. You will find a way to invest to acquire new customers. And the moment that those customers are on your site, you want to make sure that they sign up very, very quickly, because then you can start tracking them everywhere. So cookieless world, does it scare me so much? No, not at this stage. I think, 1 year ago, definitely everybody in this room would have been probably thinking the same thing. But yeah, we live and learn. We've had this experience, and
It's good practice for what's to come.
100%, 100%, especially with iOS in this region, and we're ready for it. Bring it on. It's okay.
Awesome. Well, one last question for all of you, in turn, is, define what achieving that 360-degree view is going to look like. Just the top couple of success metrics that you're looking for that you'd like to share with the audience. Ahmed, you can.
Well, success is how you define it, really, because as a head of business, as a marketeer, what you look at, again, are the goals that you define. So data is there to help you achieve those goals. So for example, if I set out one of my goals to be throughout the entire year that I want to take a look at churn and I want to decrease my churn percentage, or I want to decrease the number of inactive users, or I want to increase the number of top-line spenders, these are all different goals where you can utilize data to measure success with. But data on its own, you can never measure success with.
Yeah.
And you've got this on our badge over here. So it's insights what are very, very important, and data will help you drive those insights.
Yeah.
So ultimately what it comes down to is, what are your business goals? What are your customer goals? And you need to make sure that you're aware of the changes that are coming ahead. The way that you collect data today isn't going to be the same way that you collect data tomorrow. And what you're going to be doing with that data today depends on exactly what your goals are for the business and how exactly you want to grow it. So once you have more customers taking part in the happy journey versus less customers taking part in the sad journeys or the unhappy journeys, then you know that whatever you're doing is working. But only for a limited time because our world is ever changing.
Absolutely right.
Yeah,
Aryan,
to add on to what Ahmed said, I think definitely we need to merge those two goals, like organizational goals with customer goals. And also, I think some of the success metrics that I personally believe should come into the future and will do, considering the experience is pivotal right now. Like before, it was mostly customer lifetime value, right? I think it will now move to customer relationship value, right? How much do you value that relationship? It's not what the customer is bringing in, it's how much you as a business are sort of valuing that relationship, right? The difference between those two numbers, I think, would give out a number that, you would are willing to spend, let's say, to acquire a new customer. And once you realize that that number is so big, right, you would want to retain your current customers, and that's where the power of experience will come in. So I think in a 360-degree view, the who will benefit overall is definitely the customer and eventually the business.
Well said.
Yeah, I think Ahmed and Aryan both covered most of the points. But yeah, just something to add on is a follow-up on the relationship part is what does the customer think about your brand? Yeah, I think that would be your final sort of conclusion, and added to those metrics, you would be looking at like an advanced version of, say, time on site or CLV, where revenue discussions will forever go on in any business, but specifically under marketing, I think we've seen it over the last decade, how things were. I think platforms became lazy, if for a choice of better words, when we got email information, when we got to retarget customers just by their email addresses and telephone numbers. But I think once we set up different lines of communication, then eventually it becomes a place of what the customer actually thinks about your brand and how likely is he or she to transact with your brand. That would translate into what's that brand identity? How deep is that into the life of the customer? And eventually, obviously, we will be always calculating revenues on top of that.
Yeah, of course. I really urge everybody to make the acquaintance of Aun and Aryan and Ahmed. I think they've got a combined, I'm sorry guys, I'm going to say this out loud, but probably about 15 to 20 years worth of experience under their belt. So if you do get a chance, definitely go say hi and ask them about that. But thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for spending the day with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.